It's a rhythm we're called to live with. You have a rhythm. And yet, we just forget. For whatever reason, the noise and the distractions and the chaos of life, they get us caught in a trap. And yet that rhythm was put into us from the very beginning. It's a gift. A gift you were given, but a gift we oftentimes ignore. We are called to work hard, but we are also called to rest. And yet not all of us do. Many of us forget that second part, the rest part. In fact, many of us wear that like a badge. It's a badge of honor. I work, I'm a workaholic, I got to get it done, I do more than you, I have accomplished more than you, I've got to go, do, see how much better I am because I know how to work and I don't know how to stop. And we wear it like it's pride and it's a badge of honor, but don't you know it's a trap? It's a trap. And we weren't created to live that way. You're going to hear me say that several times today because I'll never forget a friend looking at me caught in this trap, and he said, Jason, you weren't created to live that way. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, no, you weren't created to live that way. But no, you weren't created to live that way. You weren't created to live that way. And he kept saying it until I got it. That's how far in the trap you can get. You're not created to live these frantic, reckless, red line lives that we sometimes get caught in the trap of. And some of you out there are caught in this trap. How do I know that? Takes one to know one. Some of you are caught in that trap. But it's not the way the machinery was created to work. And I see it all the time. I mean, I get it. There are going to be times and seasons in our lives when we have to redline, okay? There are times when you have to. But it's then you even have to be more careful to make sure you back away. There will be seasons of busyness in your life. But it's times like that we need to be even more intentional. Because I've watched too many people in their jobs, I've watched too many people in their families, and I've watched too many people even in the church. And they come off the running blocks, full speed, full sprint. They're full of energy. Man, this is awesome. But they never finish the race. Somewhere along the way, they burn out. They fall off. What happened? And I think it's something we know down deep and we've talked about before. Life is a long-distance race, not a sprint. And sometimes we get in the trap of being in a constant sprint. And we don't know how to pace ourselves. And when we do that, we don't finish well. Maybe you're caught in that trap. And so the first thing we need to keep in mind is your first fill-in for today, if you're going to follow along in the sermon notes on the back side of the worship guide. The first thing we have to know and understand is this. Life takes endurance to navigate it properly. Life takes endurance. You can't always go at a constant sprint. You've got to take time out. You've got to get some rest. The writer in Hebrews 12, as you can see, wanted to remind us, let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. You're called to run with perseverance. You're called to run with endurance. If you're going to carry out this mission that God has for you, and every single one of you, I want you to know you were created with a purpose and you were created with a mission. God has a plan for you. You are not an accident. And if you are going to accomplish this vision and this mission that God has for you, if we as a church are going to accomplish the God-sized dreams that God is calling us to, we are going to have to learn to work hard, but we're also going to have to be awesome at rest. You gotta have both. It's built into who we are. But how many of us get caught in that trap of just going and going and going? We think that we can do this forever. But you do it and you do it and you do it and you end up hitting the wall. Anybody here ever hit the proverbial wall before in your life? Yeah, a lot of hands. You can't go on like that forever, can you? And the problem is when we hit the wall, you splatter into pieces, don't you? And it affects everyone around you, and it affects everything. It affects your work, it affects your family, it affects your marriage and your relationships. It ends up affecting everyone around us. And what we have to learn is the second principle today. We need to find our rhythm. You've got to find that rhythm, like that heartbeat. Dum, 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 dum. It's as if God already put a rhythm inside of you. That heartbeat. We see that rhythm right in the first chapter of the very first book of the Bible, Genesis, where God creates, and it's this beautiful poem of creation. Throughout this whole chapter, we see this rhythm, we see this tempo. God creates, it is good, sunrise, sunset. God creates, it is good, sunrise, sunset. And this happens for 6 times, this rhythm, this tempo. But on the 7th one, it gets interrupted. Suddenly that tempo, that rhythm gets interrupted. And we end up seeing in Genesis chapter 2, verse 1, it says, on the 7th day, instead of creating and blessing, we see on the 7th day, God had finished the work he'd been doing. So on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. And then God blessed the 7th day, and he made it holy, which means set apart for God's purposes. Because on it, he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Later, that word would become a word that many of you may know, Sabbath. Later, that word becomes Sabbath. And Sabbath simply means this. Sabbath means rest. When you have a Sabbath day or you take a Sabbath, you're saying, I have a day of rest. Now, the first mention of Sabbath we see in Scriptures, oddly enough, is the 10 Commandments, which is the series that we are in. As we're talking about keep to the code, what are these 10 Commandments, and are they even relevant today to us? And I think we're finding out more and more, if you're hanging on throughout the series, that they are extremely relative to us today and have enormous impact and meaning in our lives. When we get to what we call the 4th commandment, we catch that in Exodus 20, verse 8. God is speaking to the Israelite nation. He says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or your daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that's in them. But he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and he made it holy. Notice we get to this point in the story, and they're being reminded of this creation story, that you were created to work 6 and take 1 off. That's why for those who have been in church for a while, sometimes you hear something like, oh, well, isn't that the Old Testament? Isn't that the law? We don't really have to follow that. And the answer is no. This was written in the creation story. The law didn't show up for thousands of years later. This isn't about law. This is about understanding who you are and how you were created and what God has in store for you. This isn't the law. It's just that when they get to this point in the Exodus story, they're being reminded that it's work 6, take 1 off. Why? Because when they were enslaved in Egypt, they worked 7 days a week. In their slavery in Egypt, they had been forced to work 7 days a week. And over 400 years, they forgot this principle that had been built into them in their creation story and understanding who they are. They had forgotten this principle, work 6, take 1 off. And so they're being reminded of who they are and what they were created to do. This, by the way, ended up being a problem in the Roman Empire too. We have several documents outside the Bible of the Romans talking about the Israelite nation and the Hebrews in which they considered them lazy. because they insisted on taking one day off each week, because in the Roman culture, you also worked 7 days a week. There was not a day off in that culture, just as there was not a day off in the Egyptian culture. So they often talked about the Jews as if they were lazy people because they insisted on having this one day off, and the Romans couldn't seem to do anything about it. Which gets us to a principle in the world we need to be very cautious of, because we begin to see this pattern over and over again in history, and I'm telling you, we're seeing it in our culture now too. The world and the powers and the empires and the people in control, even the corporations, if they had their way, you'd be working 7 days a week. You got to fight it. This world and the system, if it had its way, you'd be working 7 days a week, and God's constantly writing in to his promises. Listen, I didn't create you to live that way. But I understand that the world is going to push, and they're going to pull at that, and they're going to challenge it, because it's completely to their advantage that you work 7 days a week. You will gain nothing more, but they will gain more. And by the way, that's what empire is all about. Empire is about consuming. It's about taking more ground. It's about getting more and more and more, because empires exist to consume. And you live in an empire, whether you like to believe that or not. They're fighting for your time, your energy. And we have to be weary of that. Why? Because many of us have forgotten how to rest. A great number of us have forgotten. We're always going, we're always pushing the limit. We're always seeing how much further we can go. And we don't take time for the tempo and those rhythms in our lives, and it's hurting us. You say, what's an example? Sure, I'll give you a real easy one for those who've been around a while. Thanksgiving. How many of you remember when Thanksgiving was a day off for everything except maybe the essentials in our culture, right? But haven't we noticed something in the last few years? More and more businesses are opening. More and more people are working. More and more. Why? Because the companies need more money, more things. Even as a culture, we're forgetting how to just take days off and rest. When I grew up, I remember Sundays. Largely, everything was closed. Maybe a few restaurants here and there. You'd be hard-pressed to get an oil change on a Sunday. Now it's my choice where to go, isn't it? Sunday's just a day like any other, and I'm not judging it, not condemning it. I'm just saying, you see how it's marching on? It's a little bit like a frog and the water's heating up. We don't even know it. More and more ground being taken. More and more we're forgetting how to rest. More and more that's becoming completely acceptable. But to whose benefit? Because you weren't created to live that way. You weren't created to live that way. More and more, the culture's stealing it back, and it seems like what they're sending is a message that says, work harder, keep going, spend more, do more. And I believe this has long-term lasting effects on our health, both spiritually, physically, and mentally. You keep going, you keep redlining, you keep, without stopping, working the schedules and the hectic lives we're living, you will hit the wall. And it will have effects not only on you and your physical health, your mental health, but also on the people around you. We got to be careful. And here's the deal. Honestly, I'm the last one who should be standing up here talking to you about this. This is my thing, man. We all got our junk, man. You want to know one of my big ones? Here it is. Actually, I stand before you today saying, I apologize. I'm so sorry. I have not set the example I'm supposed to set on this. I have not been living this. I am so sorry. But first time kicked by the mule, shame on the mule, right? Second time, shame on you. sorry. I'm going to do a better job with this. Now, how about you? How about you? What's it going to mean for us to run the long-distance race? What's it going to mean for us to set the example to our family? What's it mean for us to set the example to our coworkers and to the people around us in our life? What is it going to mean for us to raise the bar in leadership and lead strong? What's it mean in your life? I know what it means in mine. So let's talk about some of the signs then that maybe you're burning the candle at both ends. What are some of the signs of burnout, or that you're heading towards that wall, that you're not getting the rest you need? I think some of the signs of this, and maybe you'll recognize a few of these as we put the list up there real quick. Some of those signs include exhaustion, lack of motivation, frustration, cynicism, and other negative emotions, slipping job performance, interpersonal problems at home and work, not taking care of yourself. Here's a favorite: being preoccupied with work when you're not at work. Generally decreased satisfaction and ultimately even health problems. Did you know stress and worry and anxiety and failing to get the rest you need actually affect your health? Time and time again. More than 60% of the people that enter hospitals it is somehow related to anxiety. Did you know that? It's a part of our culture, and we have to be careful. Now, last week we talked about the 10 Commandments, and I challenged us to look at them differently. If you didn't catch that, I really encourage you to go to our website and watch this one, because it's key to understanding this whole conversation that we're in. But I challenge us not to see the 10 Commandments as a set of rules and regulations, things you have to do to get God off your back so he's not angry at you. That's not what they're meant to be. What we challenge each other to see is to understand that this God constantly throughout the Bible is crying out to his people, I will be your God. You will be for me a people. It's an invitation to a covenant relationship with God. And the 10 Commandments aren't rules, regulations. They're not obligations in a contract. We don't get married out of obligation and to fulfill a contract to our other partner. We get married to be in covenant relationship with them. And what is a covenant? Is a promise made in love. If you truly love me, you won't do these things. And so the challenge isn't to see the 10 Commandments as a set of obligations. The 10 Commandments define what this covenant relationship looks like between God and us. And so he's calling us to live that. And one of the things we would say to a marriage and to people who are going to get married is we say, listen, marriage is a new beginning, not an end. You've got to carve out time in your marriage to be with each other. You've got to carve some time out to ensure that the two of you are in a loving relationship with each other, that you give each other the love, the time, the attention, and the presence they need. And I've reminded you of this before, but I remind you again, did you know you can be in a room but not be present? There's a difference. Our spouses want our presence. What does it mean for us to be present in our relationship, to set aside loving, genuine, quality time? That's what the Sabbath is about. What does it mean for you to set time aside for God, not out of obligation, not because he's going to be hacked off at you if you don't? What does it mean to set quality time aside because you love God and he loves you? See how different suddenly the 10 Commandments are? What does it look like to set aside time for your spouse? We've got to remember that Sabbath is time for you and it's time for God. You need time for yourself in rest. But Sabbath is also designed for you to spend that time connecting with God. And when you declare that you're a follower of Jesus Christ, a Christian, it means that you are in a covenant relationship with God. And a covenant goes both ways. So to take that time is to say, I want quality time, not only to rejuvenate myself, but also to hear from this person who I am in a covenant relationship with. It's both. There's a second part to this today, though, but we talked about that last week. The second part I want you to understand is this. Sabbath is about what it means to be truly human. Now, what do I mean by that? Sabbath is understanding about what it means to be true, how we were created, how this machinery is supposed to work. It's about understanding who we are. Now, there's an analogy I use for people who are in my leadership groups, sometimes leadership development and so forth. And so if you've been in one of those, I think this will be a good reminder, so pay attention. We'll talk about it again, but for many of you, this might be new. And the analogy goes something like this. Let's say I want to buy a new lawnmower, and I go out and I purchase a lawnmower, and I want to find out what is the best way to use this lawnmower. I want to use it in the best way possible. I want to get the most life and endurance out of this lawnmower I can get. Where would I go to find out how to best use this lawnmower so that I get the best experience I can have with it? Well, I could talk to a salesperson, but I think that's limited. But if I really want to know how to use this thing, you go to the user's guide, don't you? The user's manual. Why do I go to the user's manual? Well, who better to know how to operate a piece of equipment than the person who created it, right? But let's say I decide that even though I read the user's manual, I'm not going to use the right gasoline, not going to use the right oil, put the wrong parts on it. And instead of mowing grass, you know what? I think I'll mow rocks. What's going to happen to my lawnmower? I think we'd all agree it's not going to work properly over time. It's going to break down. Even worse, I could break it forever, couldn't I? Yeah. Yep. What happens when I decide I don't want to use the machinery properly? You see, the Bible, it's quick and easy to see. It's just a set of rules. But have you ever thought it's the manufacturer talking to his creation saying, I know how I created you. I know how this thing called your body and your mind and your spirit are supposed to work. And I'm telling you right now, I created it to work 6 days and take one off. And if you're going to use the equipment in a way where you're not going to do the 6 in 1, things are going to happen to it. In fact, you might eventually kill it. You may shorten its lifespan. God, our creator, our manufacturer, is looking down and saying, I didn't create you to work 7 days a week. If you want this equipment to work properly, if you want to live the life I created you to live, if you want to accomplish what I created you to accomplish, work 6 and take 1 off. You see how differently you look at it now? I mean, if I call the manufacturer and say, hey, I mowed rocks, I broke your mower, is the manufacturer going to be mad at me? No. They may laugh at me. But they're going to say, what do you think happens when you don't use the machinery the way it was created to be used? How you doing? Work 6. Take 1 off. That's how we were created to live. And it's not rules. Which means if we're going to live this way, if we're going to be deliberate and intentional about our Sabbath, a last principle we really need to understand is this. Sabbath is about managing our time. It is about managing our time because time is a gift. It's a gift you have been given in stewardship, by the way. They're not making any more time. There's 24 hours in a day. There's 7 days in a week. So that being the case, what are you doing in stewardship to manage your time in such a way that you work 6 and you take 1 off? Because I'll tell you this, and I've learned this recently, and I knew it anyways. That 1 day off, it's a fight. There is always something pulling at you. There is always something wanting to get you up and get you going and break it. You know what I've learned about leadership? Leadership isn't about what to say yes to all the time. Leadership is more often understanding what to say no to. And when you make Sabbath a priority, and when you make rest a priority, you are going to have to say no to some things. You're going to have to hurt some people. You're going to have to upset them. But you have to determine in your heart, I was created to live this way. This is how I'm supposed to live. Can you get that for me real quick? This is what I'm supposed to do. Which means that sometimes no is no. Here's the bad news. Your pastor isn't going to work 7 days a week. Yeah, you clap now until it's your day. Until your marriage is falling apart on my day off. Until you're in the hospital on my day off. Till that thing you have to know has to be known on my day off. What then? It's easy to clap. What if it's you? Which means that if I'm going to win this race, as we're called to do, this long-distance endurance race, there are going to be times I'm going to have to say no to you as well. And it doesn't mean I don't love you. Doesn't mean I hate you. It means that I can't be at every party. I can't be at every hospital visit. I can't go to every dinner. It means that as we grow, and we are growing 18% last year, for those who are wondering. But we're growing. Which means this, I can't be everywhere at once, and I can't work 7 days a week. Neither can you. Which means that you've got to be okay with someone from my care ministry showing up to your hospital bed just as if I were there. You got to be okay when you send me an email and say, hey, I need to know about this. And I say, hey, you're talking to the wrong person. You need to speak to this person. It doesn't mean I don't love you and I don't want to deal with your situation. It just means that I have to set aside a group of leaders that are going to share the work so that we can run the race, endure, and live out the God-sized dreams we're going to live out. You got to be okay with that. I can't be the single source of what's going on around here. There's entire things going on around here I haven't got a clue about. And I love it. I love it. Because I can't be the single source of knowledge. If I am, I'm the ceiling in this organization. You understand that? It will only go as far as what I know and what I can do. Same's true in your life. And so we've got to get good at saying no, saying it nicely, but saying no. We've got to make Sabbath a priority, which means you've got to turn your cell phone and email off on your day off. You gotta clear your schedule. You gotta be present. You have to disconnect from the world, and you can't feel guilty about it. Because here's some things I know about my own industry, this ministry thing. 15,000 pastors leave ministry for burnout every year. 50 to 70% leave within 5 years of starting ministry. This is one of the reasons, by the way, we celebrated Ben a few weeks ago and just wanted to say thank you for what he was doing because he just broke the odds. Most pastors leave within the first 5 years of ministry. Of those that left, they left saying they were working 60 to 70 hours a week. By the way, that's really easy to do. It's really easy to do. And 90% of all pastors entering ministry do not retire from ministry. They either quit or have some sort of moral ethical failure that disqualifies them. Those are the results in my industry. How about yours? How about where you work? How about what you do? What does it look like? If we're going to lead, we got to lead by example, don't we? We got to expect people to follow our example, which gets me to the so what moment then. A couple years ago when I was in this trap as well, I'll never forget looking at my youngest daughter, frantically packing my bag, getting to wherever I was going, whatever I was doing, and I know I had to get something done on the computer, and she's coming, Daddy, will you just come and sit with me? I said, no, honey, I got to do something on the computer. I got to get it done. And she stopped and she goes, but you're always on the computer. Ow. Ow. I mean, is that what I want her to remember me by? Is that what I want her to think about when she thinks about her daddy when she gets older? It was very humbling. And a reality set in that day that if you take nothing away from today, I need you to take this away. Your last fill-in for the day. And this is so important. Circle it, star it, do whatever it is you do to bring attention to it. Nobody at home should feel like they're competing with somebody at work. Nobody at home should feel like they're competing with somebody at work. Now, we're not called to live lives of fear, but you want to know what one of my big anxieties is as a dad and as a pastor? It's this, that my kids would grow up and hate the church. That my kids would grow up and hate it. Why? Because they saw how I journeyed through it. And they said, I don't want anything to do with that. Nobody at home should feel like they're competing with somebody at work. Because I seriously doubt my kids are going to say on the day that I've died and they're doing the funeral, I have serious doubts that my kids are going to get up and say, you know what, I just wish Dad had preached one more sermon. I wish he'd mowed the lawn one more time, gone on one more visit, whatever it may be. It's not that those things are bad, but that's not what my kids are going to say, is it? They're going to remember those quality times as a family, that we were present, that we shared that time together. And I doubt when my wife passes away, they're going to sit there in a room and say, you know what, I wish that Mom had just done one more load of laundry. I wish she'd have gone to work one more day. We do have to do those things, but are we being intentional about taking those moments to set aside with our kids and our family and others, that time of rest? Will we break away from it all? Turn off the phones, turn off the computers, and we find that rhythm, that heartbeat. If you're caught in this trap of go, 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 do, I want to challenge you today. You weren't created to live that way. You weren't created to live that way. You weren't created to live that way. And you can break out of it. It starts by taking a day and saying, this day is for me and this day is for God. I'm going to get rest, and I'm going to connect with my Savior who wants to be in a loving relationship with me. Do that and imagine what God could accomplish through us. And so that's my challenge this week, this coming month and year. Are you taking that time to get the rest that you were created to receive? Let's pray.